My,
You did?
my modesty prevents me from agreeing with you.
Okay, members. The minutes of the meeting of the 4th, the 11th, I've signed them into the record, and John, you, the Deputy Chairperson, will sign last week's minutes of the meeting, if that's agreed.
Yep.
Okay, members, agenda item 4 under matters arising. We have correspondence from the local government auditor to Mr Hamilton Morton. At page 11 of your electronic packs is correspondence from the local government auditor to Mr Hamilton Morton. This correspondence is in response to an issue considered by the committee at its meeting of the 28th of May. The original correspondence from Mr Morton was received by one of our members, Mr Copeland. Michael, do you want to make a comment on the response that's in today's pack?
I'm quite content.
Okay. Kieran, do you want to make any comments on the content of the letter?
This is the third car now.
Members?
There's more to it. There is. Good. It was very enjoyable.
Okay, members. Are we content to note the response that has been sent? Okay. Okay, members. Agenda item 5, correspondence. There are no new items for correspondence at this meeting, so we're moving on now to. Where are we? Are they here? Oh, okay, members. The witnesses are here. Okay, members, we'll now turn our attention to today's evidence session on the Belfast Metropolitan College Titanic Quarter PPP project element of this inquiry. Do any members wish to declare an interest in these matters? No declarations. So we have with us here today Ms Elaine Harton, Ms Mary-Therese McGivern, Mr Derek Baker and Mr Tom Redmond. Thank you for joining us today. You are all very welcome to our committee. Members, you'll also find the biographies of all our witnesses at pages 16 to 20 of your packs. Members, before we start our questioning, can I draw your attention to the correspondence that is on page 21 of your packs? This correspondence relates to the disposal of the College Square East and Brunswick Street sites. Are members content to note this correspondence? Members content? Yeah. Also included in the packs at pages 25 to 65 are the qualification reports on accounts for BMC from 2007-8 to 2011-12. Are members also content to note these documents?
Yes.
Agreed. Okay. Okay, members and visitors and witnesses, can I start this session just by doing a few housekeeping? No mobile phones, if we could have them switched off, as they do interfere with Hansard. That's for members in the public gallery also. Okay, I want to start by paying tribute to the new campus at the Titanic Quarter. The new building was finished on time, and this is to be commended to everyone involved. It's won awards for its design and environmental standards, and it also has a high level of staff, student and employer satisfaction, so that has to be commended. However, in terms of why we're here today, we do have concerns around the cost, the time taken to negotiate the contract and its impact on value for money, the delays that occurred prior to construction commencing, and the additional costs incurred outside of the PPP agreement. So it is these concerns that has led this committee to conduct the inquiry, and we will be asking questions of you today in relation to these areas, and members will have their own opportunity in terms of their own core areas to ask questions. So, with your indulgence, I'll start the line of questioning. As we're all aware, the public-private partnership (PPP) key aspect of the PFI PPPs is the transfer of risk from the public sector to the private sector relating to the design, construction, finance and maintenance and/or operation of assets. In return, the government pays an annual unitary charge over the lifetime of the contract, and in this case 25 years. The public sector has injected 20 million into this PPP project. What is the justification for this, and how does it fit into the PFI concept? And that's to Mr. Baker.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your introduction there. This was a complicated project. It was a very difficult project for all kinds of reasons. And as you've pointed out, the negotiation of the contract was buffeted by factors intrinsic to the project and indeed extrinsic to the project. And I accept fully that it took longer than it should have done, and that is disappointing to us all. In all of our dealings with the bidder and the potential contractor, both the college and the department were trying to protect the public sector interest, and I think that point is acknowledged by the Audit Office in its report. And along the way, we faced substantial difficulties, which from time to time had the very real potential to derail this project. There's no question about that. At times, it was close to failure. So, the college and the department had to take some hard decisions about this. At some stages, seminal points in the progress in the project were: do we want to proceed with this, or are we going to let it fail? And one of the most significant issues which impacted on the negotiations was the property crash, which fed through to liquidity problems in the banks and the credit crunch, and the loss of appetite amongst financial institutions to lend money. And specifically in this project, the bank concerned was losing its appetite to lend money to the bidder. And at that point, the bank was threatening to walk away. And both the college and the department on the one hand, and the special purpose vehicle on the other, had to engage with the bank, first of all, to shore up its confidence, but also to try to identify other financial backers. The efforts to identify alternative financial backers failed. Either the terms they were offering were too expensive, or they weren't prepared to put up the quantum of money needed. The Ulster Bank was held on board, but the price for doing so was that the department and the college increased their capital input, upfront input to the project. However, I would make the point that in doing so and increasing the upfront payments, the benefit to that was a corresponding reduction in the unitary charge. So, for example, in purchasing the site, which was one of the decisions, which was purchased at £5 million, that was always going to have to be purchased. If it wasn't purchased through the upfront cost, it would have been purchased through the ongoing unitary charge. The increase in the bullet payment from £10 million to £15 million, which was done admittedly to save the project, again resulted in a reduction in the unitary charge over the lifetime of the project. So what did the department and the college get out of the capital investment? They saved the project. In the case of the capital investment in the site, there was an economic advantage in doing so, and I can go into that further if you wish, but I won't go into it now. And also the unitary charge was reduced. I don't know, Chair, whether you would like to give me an opportunity to bring any other colleagues in if they want to add to that.
If they want to add to
I'm
that.
at your disposal on that point. I don't know whether anybody wants to add any comments.
Just to add to what Derek says, I think that if the Chair's question relates to whether in the end what we got out was worth the effort, we would have to say from the college's point of view that all the criteria that we measure now would suggest that it was. I think it's also, hindsight can be 20/20 vision, and I think there was at that time a lack of other alternative route. PFI was effectively the only show in town, and government at that point could not have afforded to have taken on the investment at that stage. So I think that you know, in that sense, it was the only way forward if we were going to address the issues which had been identified in terms of the lack of quality in both College Square East and Brunswick Street at that time.
Okay. Just before letting other members in, Mr Baker, you talked about the unitary charge. What would it have been if it had been reduced?
I think
Do you have a figure on
the
it?
additional £5 million that we put into the bullet payment, I think that resulted in a reduction in the unitary charge of just over £360,000 per annum over the 25 years of the project.
Okay. I'll let Mr Clark come in here.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just listening to Marie-Therese. Your comment in terms of PFI was the only show in town. Was that the only show in town at any cost?
No, and I'm not suggesting that any cost would have been the way to do it. But I think
But your comments were that it was the only show in town.
Well, what I'm saying is,
and I would like have confidence that there should have been a caveat in terms of it's okay, something's the only show in town, provided that it's cost effective.
well, I think so. I agree with you absolutely and entirely, and I think government accountability, public accountability, would require that. What I am saying is that it was the only methodology that, if we were going to proceed with a building, was the only way forward. However, it also then had to meet all the criteria which were set to prove that in fact it was advantageous to go down that way. So I'm not saying we did it regardless. There was only one methodology. We then tested that methodology. If that methodology had not stacked up, then I suspect we would still be in College Square East and Brunswick Street.
And probably a lot richer for that as well. Derek, in terms of the, you made a point in your opening remarks that the project was close to derail.
Yeah.
Which, if you actually tie that in terms of Marie-Therese's comments about the any show in town, suggests to me that you were going to do anything at any cost to make this work. Why were the banks so nervous? Why were the banks wanting to pull away? What that would suggest to me is that the banks didn't see merit in the project in terms of their investment. So maybe you could tell me why the banks wanted to pull away and why you were so enthused in terms of trying to change this project to keep the banks on board.
Okay. Dealing with your first question, why did the banks want to pull away? That was a direct consequence of the property crash, which impacted on the liquidity of all the financial institutions and reduced their appetite to lend. If you roll back to the time that we're talking about and think specifically of the bank that we're talking about, that bank was in real difficulties, and all of the banks retrenched in their lending and they lost their appetite to lend, and that effectively was the credit crunch. They were very, very nervous, and this was a large amount of money that the Ulster Bank was being asked to lend to the bidder in this case, and they didn't want to lend it, or at least they were losing their appetite to lend it. And, you know, the fact that the bank was getting nervous about this could actually be a reflection on the terms that had been negotiated, i.e. the advantageous terms that had been negotiated as part of the project. To go back to your second question, and that's a really important point and I agree with you, was it a case of shoring up this project at all costs? No, it wasn't, most definitely not. The project was important. It was hugely important both to the college specifically and to further education generally. That is a given, and there was a pressing business need for this. The college was occupying 2 premises which were past their shelf life, and there's no question about that. However, we were not engaged in a wild adventure in this thing, and as the Audit Office report notes, at every stage and in every decision that we took, we sought to protect the public interest. And the point is, in every decision we took on financing, whether it was increasing the bullet payments or purchasing the site, whatever, in the PFI deal, we continually assessed whether we were securing value for money against the shadow bid model, which is the benchmark for testing value for money. Affordability is an absolute. You either can afford something or you can't, and in this case we could afford it, but value for money is a relative assessment against some kind of benchmark, and we always secured value for money at every stage against the shadow bid model. So it wasn't a wild adventure, and it wasn't at any cost.
So, well, I mean, you talk about affordability as one of but
Yeah.
did you not have to get additional monies pumped in as well? Was it 20 million? So back to your point in terms of affordability is something you have to bear in mind, and value for money, but you actually had to go and chase an additional £20 million.
We did, at appropriate points through the project, an affordability assessment and a value for money assessment, and they were done according to all the guidance. And there were actually 3 such assessments done as we approached the contract close in this, and on each and every occasion those assessments showed that the project was both affordable and demonstrated value for money against the shadow bid model. And in terms of affordability, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. The college is affording it, and the department is affording it. And indeed, when the department decided to use its capital budget to invest in this, it was doing so on the basis that this was good business for the department, because this was a priority project and the resources were available from within its capital budget. So it was quite prepared to invest in this, and it wasn't at the time displacing any other priority projects.
Can I just bring in Mr. Dallett, Deputy Chairperson?
I know I'll come back to you later to ask some detailed questions, but Marie-Therese, I can't help remarking that you said hindsight equals 2020 vision. Did anyone check the vision of the people who embarked upon this project?
Well, if you ask me, the vision was checked at regular times.
Well, then why such a cacophony of errors all through it? Albeit at the end of the day, a success story, but can I suggest more by good luck than anything?
Well, I think that, we can go in detail, and the report does address in detail a number of the errors which are suggested happened. And I mean, I will keep you going for the next hour if you want me to go through root and
No, I've
branch
had a
of
difficult
those
day
errors.
already, and I've been
I know,
hearing
but what
the
I'm saying
harbour
is
and viewed the new
we-
building and all that.
We don't dispute that there were difficulties in the college in terms of the way decisions were taken. I mean, that's already in the public record. So there were difficulties, and that's a learning lesson for us. I think that we have learnt many lessons from it, and we have gone on to build a second building since that, which I think hopefully will not find its way to the PAC at a future date.
You wouldn't do the same thing again?
No, we did very differently.
Chairperson, we're
than the first time.
dovetailing very well here, because my only purpose in being here is to make my contribution to a report which will make sure that never again will public money be put into a situation like that where people were not in control. That's the only reason for being here.
Thank you, Deputy Chairperson. Mr. Girvan.
Thank you. I appreciate that we're dealing with whether this all stacks up, and where I come from, and appreciate the people at the end of the table maybe are not necessarily the people who made the decision initially. You might well be trying to dress up the details of what has actually happened, but I'm saying that as far as further education colleges, we've developed, there's been quite a few of them built over recent years, and there is a valuation of how much you spend per square foot, and appreciate we've got a high quality building here. But is there any indication of benchmarking between what has been spent in relation to the delivery of the facilities down at Titanic in comparison to other further education properties throughout Northern Ireland? I'm not maybe just going to go into England, but we'll just focus on what's happened here in Northern Ireland, and new facilities which have been provided within this last number of years, and the costs associated with those per square metre by comparison to what we pay and have paid for what we have at Titanic. And there is a table, and I think it's an appendix C of the report, in which it makes very interesting reading, and I would like to see some rationale as to a breakdown of how we end up with a unitary cost at such a level.
Okay. Chair, can I take that question? And just in response to Mr. Garvin's first point, I mean, I am the person responsible.
Yes, I know that.
No. But I'm the person responsible. How did we get to the cost of this thing? I mean, it's a very good question. And you're absolutely right. What does it cost to build a college, and what is the right price to pay for a college, you know? And it's got to be more than sort of stick your finger in the air and guess, which is why...
But where the other wee point, and who set the specifications of the finish? That's the other point.
Okay. And, you know, that is why we have a process called a shadow bid model, where you commission independent advice, which looks at what it is you're trying to do, and gives you advice on what would be a reasonable price based on all of their experience in engaging with the private sector. And so that's your reference point, whether you're paying over the odds or below the odds or whatever. And that's the recognised way of assessing such matters.
Would that be assessed by consultants?
It would. It would be assessed by consultants.
That might dovetail in.
It's a very detailed process that you go through. Now, your point about benchmarking is a good one too, and it is a difficulty in further education, and it's a difficulty for all kinds of reasons. If you think about schools, they're much easier, and you think about enrolment in schools, you have your set population, there's a statutory duty on a certain age group to attend, they're attending 5 days a week, 9 to 3:30 or whatever the times are. You can work out, the usage of your building and whether it's being used efficiently. But think of a further education college. Enrolments fluctuate. People go at their own discretion. There's part-time, full-time, evening, short courses and everything else. So getting the metrics by which you can benchmark the usage and the efficiency of usage between one college and another is difficult. However, a lot of detailed work is going on with the Strategic Investment Board for Northern Ireland to look at actually an asset management strategy right across the public sector, but specifically within that, doing work with further education colleges so that we can assess across the 6 colleges that exist, and indeed within the campuses that exist, whether we're getting efficient use for the square footage and the premises that we have. Now, that is work in progress. It is very difficult work because, comparing apples with apples is sometimes hard to nail down given the different curricula in different facilities. But we are working on that, and that will be used, indeed, as part of the benefits realisation on this project, but for us in the department to assess the relative performance of colleges. We have become a bit more sophisticated over the years, and we have a further education health check, which draws together all kinds of metrics: finance, qualifications, staffing ratios, quality inspection, and we will include this in it as well. I can't give you a definitive answer now because that work is not completed, but it is work in hand and we recognise the need to do it. Now,
would that include a whole of life costs across other projects that are similar to this as well?
I don't know is the answer to that. I honestly don't know, and I would be happy to get back to you and give you more detail on that benchmarking.
There will be a number of questions that will come up here today that we might not necessarily get the answers from. I would appreciate if that could be brought back to committee chair through yourself, that we could get those details. And by that, I'm asking one question in particular, and that is for an overall whole of life project cost and valuation between one project and another, because we have a list of similar projects here. Yeah. I believe them to be similar. They might be totally different.
I know. And
I'm also interested in relation to the specification that was used in the building and who set that specification.
Okay.
And by that I mean the finishes that were used.
Okay. Well, again, the specification for the building was set out in great detail in the contract and in the project agreement. I've looked at that and it runs to 400 pages in total, including 27 appendices, and all of that was set out.
But who set those? Were the consultants the people who set that, or was it the department?
The department didn't. The project board set the Sorry,
just to say how we got to developing a spec. The college did an original vision economic appraisal of the 2 buildings, which was initiated in 1999. That was completed in 2000. The conclusion of that was that there was a requirement to replace the 2 buildings in the city centre. That then would have formed the basis of the kind of spec that would eventually have emerged. Then Springvale intervened, and so the original business case, which emerged around 2000, had to be refreshed in 2004, and had to take into account the change in what should have been, or what could have been at Springvale, and what in fact happened. That refreshed would have then set the framework to develop the spec. So the spec would have come really from the work which the college was internally doing. Obviously, we were passing on information to Dell, but they would have been doing that internally, setting that spec, making sure that whatever the building was met the needs which College Square East and Brunswick Street firstly in terms of student numbers, meeting compliance issues, and that was a real problem, particularly in College Square East as we were moving the disability legislation was changing at that time. So that spec, the bones of that spec would have come out of those visioning and then the business case processes and the refreshed business case processes. So in that sense, the project board, or the capital board as it was then, the capital projects board within the college, would have been developing that spec.
And maybe other members might want to.
Can I just ask there, well then does the project board get it by the consultants then? Or they were part of the project board?
My understanding is that they did use consultants. The consultants were first employed in 2000 and the college brought in consultants, I think, in 2002 when they did the original piece of work. And they may well have used consultancy support in 2004 when they did the refreshed business case. But it would have been more an iterative process. I mean, consultants may well have been used to get into the nitty-gritty and the kind of technical information. But the framework in terms of what the college wanted, which is kind of the basis of the spec, would have come initially from the college. Consultants may well have turned that into square footage and all those other issues that you would imagine. But the spec would have come from the client.
Yeah, Mr. Baker, do you want to come in?
Chair, can I just bring in Tom to try and answer Mr. Gervin's and Mr. McQuillan's questions further? If I just go back to the shadow bid model. The shadow bid model is actually a financial model that comes to a conclusion about what the overall cost of this project will be. The individual inputs into that shadow bid model will be contemporary information relating to build costs, to whole life cycle costs, design costs and other costs that feed into and come out with a net present value that is the benchmark against which the project has to be delivered. So if you think that the shadow bid model actually sets the cost barometer, the value for money barometer against which the project has to be delivered, then the quality that you're looking for is the best available quality that you can get within that benchmark parameter. So effectively, by putting an NPV on the shadow bid model, you're effectively saying, well, that's where we expect the quality to come in at and the best quality that we can get. You mentioned earlier about costs relating to different projects, and it is difficult to compare them across time because, as you can imagine, building square metres of further education accommodation in 2007, 2008, at the height of the property market, would have been much more expensive than it would have been perhaps 6, 7, 10 years earlier. So the cost per square metre going into the shadow bid model in 2007, 2008 would have been significantly higher than if a shadow bid model had been constructed 5 or 6 years earlier. Well, sorry, if I just finish this point. The shadow bid model was actually constructed by the college's independent advisors. But in addition to that, when it was completed, it was signed off by Central Procurement Directorate, again independently signed off by the Central Procurement Directorate, DFP Central Procurement Directorate.
I can accept that, but appreciate that we're dealing with a number in southern, southeastern regional college developed two probably within a very short period of time, similar time factor, yet their unitary square metres cost is nowhere near. It's roughly 40% less than was spent in relation to the Metropolitan College, but Belfast. But I'm just wondering, you have alluded to one point, and it's in relation to how you compile those whole business cases and how you present the whole lot. We develop one with a business case for 12 car parking spaces, yet we end up building a car park, having to build a car park, and we enter into a 40-year contract in relation to that car park, yet we have a 25-year lease on the building, but we have a 40-year lease in relation to the car park end of things, a contract associated with that. And I just wonder how you introduce something where, whenever the original business case states you need, I think it was 12 car parking spaces. I might be wrong in stating.
You're right.
But just on that, and I don't want to maybe get too deep into that, because there will be others wanting to deal with that. But I'm more worried about the 40-year contract, or the 40-year contract on a car park, when we don't have a 40-year contract on the rest of the building, which is associated with that car park.
Chair, can I take the point in the car park?
You can indeed.
The point in the car park is that it was built at absolutely no cost to the college and the department. Now, this was an issue
Was there not a £5 million action there?
by the bidder and the bidder's bank. The college and the department put precisely no money into the car park. So that was a bit of good business by the college and the department. The bidder for his own, sorry.
How do you describe it?
But we're paying a year on year from the public purse use for that car park.
No, we aren't. We're getting an income indexed at 5% year on year for the car park, and the asset reverts to the college after 40 years in its entirety. The bidder, for his own purposes, decided that it wanted to build a basement car park, and we can speculate as to the reasons for that. The bidder wanted the college actually to pay for the car park, and you can understand how the bidder would come along and say, why wouldn't you want a car park? You know, it will enhance the building, it will be convenient, and you might generate a bit of income. But the college said no, and the department said no, and they stuck to their guns on that. So eventually the bidder, which really wanted a basement car park for their own reasons, funded that at their own cost, with borrowing presumably from the bank of over £5 million, and is operating that car park. It is paying a modest income to the college. It's only £10,000 a year, but it is index linked at 5% for 40 years, and at the end of 40 years that will revert to the college. So the college and the department isn't out of pocket one penny for the car park. That's why I say it was a bit of good business, because the college is also getting the benefit, if you like, the convenience. Now, it's not a monetary benefit, but the convenience of having a basement car park.
Well,
so I think there might have been a misunderstanding that somehow the college had paid for this. It didn't.
Can I just, if you allow me, Kieran, do you want to make a comment on that? The Auditor General.
Just return to paragraph 2.8 of the report. Connected with the difficulties with the car park, we see that the funding bank and ICL sought potential co-funders for the project. This was unsuccessful. But in order to find a solution, there was an increase at this stage of the public sector capital contribution from 10 to 15 million. So there was a further increase in the upfront bullet payment. I suppose that there seemed to be a connection with the increased risks of the project connected with the car park.
I want to be absolutely clear on this point. I don't know whether the CNAG is suggesting that the college or the department put any money into this car park. I'm saying that they didn't, unequivocally. There was no public money went into this car park. The college is getting an income from this car park. The asset will revert to the college after 40 years. The increased bullet payment was nothing to do with the car park. I am making that point as well. I don't know whether the CNAG is saying something different.
Sorry, Chair, through the Chair. Derek, have you accepted the report?
I have accepted the
You've
report.
accepted the report in its entirety?
Yes.
Can you read paragraph 2.8 then if you've accepted the report? We'll give you a minute or two to read it.
Okay.
And it's on page 41, members.
I do not see that report saying that the college
It
or the
says here,
department
a bullet
put
accelerated debt repayment to the project from 10 million to 15 million. So whenever I went to school, that was an additional 5 million.
Yes, but that it is
And
not.
that was
Sorry.
referred to in terms of your bullet payment, and it was in conjunction with the car park, and it was under the paragraph of the report 2.8, which you've accepted.
Sorry, can I respond to that, Chair? I do not read that paragraph as saying that that bullet payment is in respect of the car park.
Would you like to explain to us how you would read that then?
Well,
Because given the paragraph's opening comments, and as you read down that particular paragraph, it refers to the construction of the underground car park.
I do not accept that that paragraph says that the bullet payment was in respect of the car park. I simply do not accept that.
Chairperson, can I read into the record? In order to find a solution being to the underground car park, to the funding situation, an increase in the public sector capital contribution, a bullet accelerated debit repayment to the project from 10 million to 15 million.
Right. Well, the difference.
So could you explain to me, Derek, how that is not an additional injection of 5 million in relation to the car park?
Yes, because I do not accept that the solution to the funding situation referring to the car park, I do not accept that the funding situation refers to the car park. I simply don't accept that.
Well, you've accepted the report, and that's clearly what it says.
Well, I don't think.
And any layman that reads that, or woman, will make any understanding will read that into that.
Well, sorry, for the record, Chair, can I say that I do not accept that the funding situation refers to the car park?
Okay.
And for the record, I want to say clearly that the department and the college put no money into the car park whatsoever. No money.
What was the 5 million used for then? Could you tell us that, and then that might offset?
The £5 million increase in the bullet payment was used to reduce the unitary charge.
And how much did it reduce it by using that 5 million?
360 over 300.
Earlier.
Yeah, sorry.
Can
But
I
it was not used to fund the car park.
Okay.
It simply wasn't.
There's a couple of members looking in here. Kieran, do you want to respond before I let members come in? Or
No, I accept what the officer was saying. There was no extent, there was no direct connection in terms of funding the car park. But what we do know is that just months before signing the PPP agreement, ICL's funding bank advised that the appetite to provide the entirety of funding for the project was significantly reduced, partly due to the financial markets and also additional interface risks with the project, and i.e. the underground car park. So the underground car park was certainly factored into that bank assessment. It may not have been the only factor, but it does seem to have a relevance.
Deputy Chairperson and then
Chairperson, with your permission, I want to go back to an interesting point that Paul was raising, but it was left hanging.
Oh, yes.
Really, again, for the record, I am extremely keen that we establish who was in charge, who was the captain of the ship. Now, I would be prone to blame consultants for things, but Marie-Therese, you said they just came in and out, so we can rule them. What grade was the person in the department handling all this money?
Chair, can I answer that one? Certainly in the first instance. There were governance structures around the project, and there was a programme board, and that was chaired, as is typical in these projects, by the senior responsible owner, and that person was...
Senior responsible owner next.
Sorry, that's a bit of a technical term that we use in project management, and the senior responsible owner, in your terminology, Mr. Dallett, is the captain of the ship. And the senior responsible owner, the senior responsible owner was the principal of the college throughout.
Who was it?
The name changed a number of times as principals came and went.
The chairperson had loads of captains of this ship.
Well, I think...
In the appendix.
Sorry.
Did they throw them overboard, or what happened?
It's in the appendix. A number, during the lifetime of this project, a number of principals of the college retired, and some went off with ill health. Okay, one went off with ill health and retired on ill health grounds. Sorry?
Any wonder? Derek, who in the department is taking responsibility?
Sorry, I'm taking responsibility.
You're the current accounting officer. Now, I've done no research, but were you the accounting officer when this happened?
No.
I came to the post this time last year.
you're not
as
guilty
an
then.
acting permanent secretary.
Chairperson, I want to put that on record that Derek's not guilty.
No.
He was in charge.
Who at the time was the
Who was?
accounting officer?
Well, actually, there were probably a number of permanent secretaries.
But you don't know, you've done, I'm sure, at least a couple of days rehearsals coming here, and you don't know.
Well, give me a year. Which year are you talking about? This project ran
Every
from,
year.
say, 2004 right through to
We're happy to take every
2011.
year. We have all day.
I know Mary-Therese said she could give me an hour. I can take all day here. I only know.
We can come back and
Well, during the lifetime of this project, there were probably 3 different permanent
Right,
secretaries.
that's good.
Well, who were they?
Well, and indeed senior responsible owners. I can give you the names of the senior responsible owners. Tom has shown me a list of them here. It's in my briefing pack. Do you want me to read out the list?
Yes,
Okay.
Thank you.
Between August 2001 to August 2002, Mr. Paddy Murphy was the senior responsible owner.
Thank
He
you.
was a principal in the college.
Thank you.
Between September and December 2002, Mr. Trevor Nealons was the principal in the college.
That's useful.
Okay? Between January 2002 and October 2008, Mr. Brian Turtle was the principal in the college. All of these individuals were senior responsible owners, by the way, of this project. Between April and June 2008, just for a short period, Mr. Trevor Smith was the principal and senior responsible owner. And between July 2008 and October 2010, Mr. Raymond Mullen was the principal. And from November 2010 until the present date, Mary-Therese McGivern beside me has been the principal of the college and the SRO for this project, the senior responsible owner for the project.
Well, Mary-Therese is here, fair duties. Why is the rest of them not here?
Well, Chair, as you know, the convention is that the current accounting officers attend, and I don't think previous accounting officers were invited to the committee.
So basically, I think, Deputy Chairperson, what you're saying is the people who are solely responsible for this debacle are not in front of us today.
You're right, Chairperson. It's a serious weakness in this whole system that one person sent to carry the can for other people that we had extreme difficulty extracting from you who they were.
Well, sorry, I didn't have the list in front of me, Mr. Dallett, when you asked me, but I'm more than happy to give it to you.
I thought you said you had it in your briefing pack.
Yeah, somewhere, but I couldn't lay my hands on it instantly, and Tom kindly found it and put it in front of me.
Chairperson, I'm going to come back later because
Yeah,
we
okay,
still have
yeah.
not established who was in charge.
I do know some members have to go into their lines of questioning
Yeah, I
now,
apologise if I have.
time-bound.
Well, sorry, Sarah, just on that point, I mean, it's a very important point you raised. You know, under the governance structures for any project, the senior responsible owner is in charge of the project, all aspects of the project. That's the way governance works in project management.
What I was trying to find out, or one of the things I was trying to find out, was who in the department had a watching brief on all this? Who allowed this to drift from 12 months to 23 months? Who managed to successfully create a situation where there was no control?
Well, I would dispute, the suggestion that there was no control.
You weren't there.
Can't say that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're
Yeah,
absolutely right,
that's right,
Mr.
you
Clark, but I have to answer the questions that you're putting to me.
Well, then answer the question that the Deputy Chair did put to you.
The permanent secretary is ultimately in control of the department, and the permanent secretary, I mean, if you want to go back to 2001, you know who the permanent secretaries are. I mean, you could name them, I can name them.
I promise you, Derek, I do not learn them off by heart.
Well, I mean, do you know what, Chair, you're making me feel very uncomfortable here, naming other
Didn't
permanent
intend.
secretaries.
Oh, right.
Can I just...
It's as if I'm in a position of being asked to pass the buck to somebody else. I'm the person who
Well, are you
carries the
acting
can
as the
for
human
this.
shield then? I've heard that word used in this building.
Sorry?
Are you acting as the human shield?
No, I'm not.
Well, then, I don't think
I
there's any
am-
difficulty in putting out the names of those.
Members, can I just intervene there? I mean, it wouldn't be hard to find out who it is,
It
and
isn't.
we can go through the research and find out at the time who the accounting officer is. But we have to move on because Mr Easton has to leave early, so we have to get into his line of questioning.
Sorry.
Have you? Right, okay.
And it's not the purpose of this committee to make people uncomfortable either. So,
Okay, it took 30 months to negotiate the contract.
Yep.
Okay. Surely, even taking into account the magnitude of the project and the contractual complexities, this is way beyond what it should have taken. Would you agree with that?
I agree. I agree entirely with you.
Okay. Preferred bidder status, which was awarded in July 2006, subject to satisfactory clarification on a number of issues. What were those issues?
I don't know whether I could hand over to Tom on that, because I honestly don't know what the specific issues were in the preferred bid, so I apologise. I don't have that information. I don't know whether Tom
I
can help me on that.
can add a little to it. I can't give the full exhaustive list. There is a letter, a preferred bidder letter, which we can make available to the committee at a later date.
Okay.
But basically, we would have looked at the bid coming forward from ICL, and subject to some satisfactory answers to things around planning risk and various other issues. We would have said, if you can give us a positive answer on a list of items, then we would be minded to confer the status of preferred bidder on that company. And I can certainly make those conditions and what they were available to the committee.
Just a quick observation, and not having to go to any panel before us, but I think we've got the wrong people to answer all our questions, but it's just an observation.
Well, I suppose maybe I should put my hand up and say that I was here for most of the project.
Okay.
In relation to an earlier question.
Why can you answer that question then?
Sorry?
Why can you answer the question?
Why can I not answer the
Yeah, in
question?
terms of the questions posed in terms of the problems.
Of the problems in relation to the preferred bidder?
Yeah.
The preferred bidder letter was issued around about 2006, and I'm sorry I haven't got the full detail of it in my head at the moment, but as I said and promised, I can make that available to the committee.
So if I was
it would have been some general issues around planning and various other items and clarifications, and leasing, and as I said, I haven't got the exact detail, but I will make it available.
Just to interject, I think 3.5 does set out where some of the issues arose. There were certainly technical issues around the leasing of the arrangement. It was quite complex. The land actually belonged to the Harbour Commissioners, and there was a lot of interfacing issues there. I think there were planning issues, which again ICL may not have expected. We know what was happening at Titanic Quarter at that time in relation to the whole master plan and what planning department wanted at that point. I think the impact of the credit crunch obviously gave ICL significant problems ultimately in terms of equity partners and trying to get sufficient funding for the project. And I would have to say, from the college's point of view, I think there were capability and capacity issues on the part of the college, which are again in the public domain in relation to it. So none of those are good additions to what, in my view, and I mean I was Director of Development at Belfast City Council, so I was used to doing large-scale projects. 12 months seems to me it was a very optimistic guess for a piece of work of this complexity to have put it through. So my view is that it was wrong to say this could happen in 12 months. The expectations were too high.
Chairperson, can I just come in here one second? I am very uncomfortable, a bit like Derek here. I am very uncomfortable the way this is going, because we have officials here today. We're trying to scrutinise a particular report, and they're not across the brief. They can't give us the questions themselves, delve into detail. I mean, some of the stuff, even in terms of that question Alex just asked, if we can't be furnished with that detail as part of this inquiry, then I really don't see the point in us going on. Because that is really getting into nuts and bolts of really what's wrong and how some of us have come to the opinion that this thing was totally and utterly out of control. Totally and utterly out of control. And we have officials here today and they can't furnish those answers. Now, we might have been playing a bit of semantics a few minutes ago in terms of names, but now we're looking at the level of detail in terms of what the problems associated with the contract were, and they can't give us that. I honestly, Chair, propose that we should suspend this. Send the officials away and get the right people here to answer these questions, because we are trying to build confidence in the public out there. The Audit Office have done a report, a very detailed report, and there's gaping holes here today in terms of what these officials are bringing to the table. We can't really get into the level of detail that we want to get into to examine the nuts and bolts and how this, in our opinion, some of us privately think, has really fell apart.
Chair, just in response to that, can I say, I can discuss the difficulties with the contract, the kind of things that Marie-Therese has just mentioned, the difficulties that arose in the negotiations about the lease, the difficulties that arose about the car park, the difficulties that arose...
Well, that's very good, Derek, but that question's been asked.
Yeah.
And you couldn't answer it.
No, it was sorry, Chair, I think it was a slightly different question than Mr Easton asked. I think Mr Easton was asking about the letter with a preferred bidder stage, not about the difficulties in the contract that subsequently arose in the negotiation of the contract, but it was the issues of clarification which were required at preferred bidder stage.
Yeah.
Now I'm paraphrasing Mr Easton here.
Chairperson, I would rather that the officials who come to this committee are across the whole brief of the whole project, so as they can answer the questions. Whichever member wishes to pose, they can answer the questions. And instead of offering us to supply us at a later date, because we really want to get into the detail of this here, so as we can actually get our heads around and actually find out what went wrong and who was responsible, and making sure that this doesn't happen again. Because the bit that bugs me about all of this, Chairperson, is this is public money. If these people were putting in their own private money, in their own wallets, this project never would have been at the Titanic Port.
Okay, can I just say that there are 7 members, because I know, Mr Copeland, you're looking in, there are 7 members, and there is particular areas of questioning that they have to yourselves. So if we
Chair,
can
we have
move,
to get the answers. There's no point in asking questions we're not getting answers.
We'll tease that out through the course of the session, and whatever you cannot answer, if the information can be forwarded to the
Chairperson, I made
committee
a proposal.
members. But there are other people who want to ask their questions.
Chairperson, I still made a proposal. I think we're wasting our time, wasting the committee staff's time, we're wasting the Audit Office's time going through this here, because it's a total charade.
The accounting officer has said that there are questions that can be answered, and I would like to hear those questions that can be answered. I'll let Mr Copeland in, for you've been waiting for some time, and thank you for your patience.
Well, it's been interesting, and I must say I do find myself in some sympathy with Trevor's views for the first time, probably. Look,
I think that's what should happen.
there were significant unresolved issues existing between Ivywood colleges at the time the deal started to proceed. They were still appointed as preferred bidder. And then within 4 months of being appointed, in a flash of inspiration, this car park thing appears on the horizon. Did it not give some concern that that 16-week period was sufficient to pretty much radically change the whole concept, to such a degree that the banks then considered it to be a more unacceptable risk, if I can put it in those terms? I'd also be curious as to where the costs of the car park and how they were actually calculated. I know a wee bit about concrete, and I know an awful lot about foundations. And the building structure that you require to build a building on the ground is one thing. The building structure that you require to build a building on top of a car park, which is underground, is an entirely different kettle of fish. The foundation structure is different, there's tanking, there's different supplies and services, particularly if there are 2 leases available. And did, in your view, the total cost of the car park component, which would have utilised certain things like foundations or values for foundations that would have been in the original building, did those amounts come out of the contract price for the building in the first place, or were they simply added in? Because they're all standing on the one foundation.
Yeah.
But the foundation is actually
Yeah.
the foundation of the car park.
Yeah.
So what did we pay for? Did we pay for a car park, or did we pay for a void underneath a building?
Additional costs.
Okay, thank you. On the first point, were we concerned? Yes, we were concerned because the bidder had submitted a proposal, and the proposal that was accepted was on the basis of the bidder providing surface car park. Now, in truth, the car parking issue was really, I won't say nothing to do with the authority in this one, but it was a separate issue because the provision of car parking was really a planning consideration, and planning risk was transferred to the bidder. So the only specification in the invitation to negotiate documentation was for a very, very small number of parking spaces. If the bidder needed to meet planning conditions or wanted to provide additional car parking space, that was a matter for the bidder to go away and to seek planning permission, and responsibility and risk for obtaining that planning permission rested with the bidder in its entirety. But it was a matter of great concern that shortly after preferred bidder stage, the bidder came back and said, do you know what, we would like to build a basement car park. And as I said, we can speculate as to the reasons for that. And, you know, that speculation is probably that the long-term attractiveness of building a surface car park in Titanic Quarter diminished for the bidder, because it might have felt in a number of years it might have not... Sorry, you want to interrupt?
Sorry, Derek, just while I get the train of thought. The original preferred bid included a provision of how many car parking spaces?
I think it was in the low teens, or sorry, the high teens.
12.
12, sorry, my apologies.
And this is a metropolitan college catering for how many pupils?
A couple of thousand. But the point is that the provision of car parking was a planning condition, and under the terms of this arrangement, planning risk and meeting planning conditions rests entirely with the bidder, and the department and the college were not going to pay for that. Okay, the risk rested with the bidder.
Would it have been reasonable to assume, I know a wee bit about foundations, I know a wee bit about concrete, and I know a wee bit about planning.
Yeah.
And if someone told me they were going to construct a signature building on the banks of the River Lagan, a regenerative building in an area post-industrial, for several thousand students, how many staff?
About 250.
12
environmental reports
12
done on
car
that.
parking spaces?
Yeah.
I just said they were laughing at you.
No,
Sorry, can
Tom.
I come in there? The ICL's original bid, in addition to the small number of car parking spaces that were identified in the tender, also offered a surface car park with 240 car parking spaces for a period of 10 years on a site adjacent to the current BMC site.
Right.
And it also specified that additional car parking.
Did they own the site that they were putting this car
Titanic
park on?
Quarter owned the site that they were specifying for the additional 240 car parking spaces. And they were also specifying in their bid additional car parking spaces in conjunction with the Odyssey Arena.
What was
So
that?
that was
The arena,
The car park opposite the arena.
which is owned by the...
The Odyssey, but they were going to negotiate a
Titanic Quarter had an
concession for those
arrangement
car parking spaces. So that was in their bid.
The site of the 250 proposed car park adjacent to the current. What's it being used for now?
Subsequently, the ICL changed their proposal to the basement car park.
Yes.
And the surface car park didn't materialise when they changed
Was
their...
the surface car park part of the original tender?
It was
agreement?
part of the original tender bid, yes.
So they took that out. They got an extra $5 million for this car park going in underneath.
Sorry, they didn't get...
They didn't
get...
No. This car park, mysteriously, they had this site. Belfast Metropolitan College is part of 250 parking spaces in an adjacent site. They then removed the 250 car parking spaces and built this thing underneath.
Yeah.
What's the value of the car parking site at 250 cars?
That was negotiated at the time, obviously quite a number of years ago again, but that was negotiated, and cost of providing that was taken out of the bid.
What was that cost?
I can't remember the exact number
And
of
what would, be
pounds.
what would have been
The lease value.
capital value? The capital value, what was it now used for? I would like to
It
get
wouldn't have
an
been.
answer, please.
It wouldn't have been a capital value because what was being offered in the bid was 10 years. It wasn't. It wasn't a site in perpetuity. It was a car parking facility for 10 years only. After which, obviously, it would have reverted back to whatever use ICL or Titanic Quarter could have achieved for it.
And is Titanic Quarter connected with the IV people who actually did this?
Yeah, they're the parent
Can I ask
company,
one
right?
question? If it was 10 years on that car park, yet we were in a 25-year lease on the building, therefore, for 15 years of the use of the building, there would have been a difficulty if if they decided to actually redevelop that site and put another building on it. You were going to then have to go and look for car parking because you only had a 10-year lease in relation to car parking, yet you had the life lease.
Well, I think that was
years.
actually part of
was their
ICL's difficulties in that they latterly realised that having provided those car parking spaces for the college for 10 years, that in 10 years' time it would have been a planning issue as to whether they would have got a change of use for that facility or not.
Yeah.
The car park, sorry.
But if I could just add one other thing, the addition of the basement car park did not change the cost specified in ICL's bid for the college.
Didn't change the cost.
Anything that was done in relation to the basement car park and any additional cost associated with that was met by ICL from within their own resources. The cost of the college building did not change from what had been specified in the tender.
Including the foundations and excavation and tanking?
Correct.
Correct.
Can I just ask, Tom, you said earlier you were through this from the early days. What was your role right through the project?
My role was to represent Dale on the project board of the BMC project and to report back through to my accounting officer, who was the person obviously with the responsibility for
So you sat
Dale's
on the
involvement.
project board through this here?
Yes,
And any of your other three colleagues? No, we're on it just yourself?
just me.
Yeah. Then, so basically, who was leading the project board? Was it?
It would have been the SRO and the names that Derek has read out.
They were on the project board as
They
well?
would have
then?
chaired the project board.
Yeah, right.
The project actually belonged to Belfast Metropolitan College.
Yeah, well, Chair, and hearing that there, I think Trevor's 100% right. You know, we have the wrong people here, and I'll second his proposal because I think we need to get to the nitty-gritty of this. You know, the college feel miserable to manage even its consultancy fees. I mean, for instance, there's a £300,000 cap over 3 years, and they end up with £1.5 million. You know, it should have been 1.8 million, and then after a bit of reasoning and negotiations, end up 1.5 million. You know, that's something the project board should have been over from day one, and they let that slip. So I think they feel miserable.
If you permit me, question he asked was, you were obviously the continuous liaison with these people.
From a departmental point of view.
In your own honest opinion, on record, were these people qualified to take charge of a multi-million-pound project like that? And given there were so many of them, they just moved on to greater things.
That's probably
The reason why
we
I'm
moved on.
asking the question is what I said at the very beginning. We would like to produce a report that prevents
Anybody coming
people
back, having to come back.
who have absolutely no concept of managing very clever people on the other side. Is that what it was? I mean, Tom,
I think they're just
you had a very difficult job. How did you do it?
Were you still there?
Well,
I mean,
Derek couldn't pick you up.
If I can answer the question, most colleges.
What training did they have?
Most colleges would not, in their lifetime, deliver more than one project of this magnitude.
It's not a queer job.
Now, to supplement that, they would have appointed a team of advisors, and the team of advisors that they would have appointed would have the technical, legal and financial capability to do this. We're talking about
With
companies.
Adrian's permission, could you please name them? All these people who presumably got fat, yes,
paid.
consultant, sorry, you said they just came in. Who were these people who give all this technical advice to these innocents at sea who were in charge of this project?
Oh yes, I can
And how much did they get?
I can name them. The advisory team that was appointed in 2002 and stayed through to 2009 until the project was signed. The financial expertise was supplied by KPMG. The legal advice was supplied by A&L Goodbody, and the technical expertise was provided by Farrell Grant Sparks.
Can I ask how much they received?
The sum of money that was mentioned earlier, 1.5 million plus VAT.
Yes. How did that raise then from 300,000 to that figure? You know, it was capped at 300,000 over 3 years.
Can I answer that, Chair? At least initially.
Right.
That was poor management. I accept that. There's no excuse for that. It's unacceptable. It should not have happened. And I wouldn't try to defend that. That was simply poor management.
But that's just one of the things that was poor management. You know, right through this whole report, you can. No, it's one after another. It's both of them.
Chairperson, can I move the proposal that was seconded by Adrian that we suspend this meeting and bring back the people that really need to be at the end of the table to get to
If Trevor would allow these colleagues to respond to that, next week this place goes into
Recess.
I'm happy enough to come back.
Can I just make a proposal? Can I suspend the meeting now for about 5 or 10 minutes till we, as a committee, discuss this? If that's okay with yourselves. And whatever our deliberations will be, we'll bring you back in again and let you know. I think that's the fair way to do it.
Should we just leave our
Yes, do. Yes.
Leave.
There's a cup of tea and coffee and water out
Thank you.
beyond.
Two.
Well, you're very welcome back again. I suppose I immediately better explain, because I saw the shock on Derek's face. I'm here because the chairperson has been called away, and we just hope everything's okay. Now, when we decided to break up, we've had a discussion, and we think and hope that we can get as much information as we need to make our report. And if at the end of the afternoon we don't, then we will obviously either recall, ask for additional witnesses, or simply write for information, which is the usual process. But I do need to emphasise that the members are determined and anxious to have a report which will serve a purpose in the future, irrespective of who the personalities are.
Chair, can I just say, sorry, thank you for that, that it is my intention and our intention to be as helpful to the committee as possible, and I apologise if there's any sense that I'm not being helpful to the committee. It is certainly not my intention.
Thank you. That's very useful. Michael, you were in full flow of asking questions, and I think with agreement of other members we can begin again with Michael.
Thank you, and Tom, these are directed at you because I believe you are probably the best place to answer them, and at no stage during this will myself or any of the other members, I presume, lose sight of the fact that we have to look at a wonderful signature building that is being used for the purpose for which it was intended, but our responsibility is to examine the matters that we're examining. I want to try and go through in my own mind just to clarify. The original business plan was based on a city centre location which only required 12 car parking spaces, presumably because in the city centre people would use public transport.
Correct. Major projects and buildings in the city centre, the plan...
I don't need that's a correct assumption.
Planning wasn't...
And there's a master plan in Belfast in which a number of companies are involved, and for whatever reason, whether they're involved in this or not, this thing ended up in Titanic Quarter. In East Belfast, as an East Belfast representative, I'm very proud of, but it ended up on the right side of the wagon. And the requirement then for 12 car parking spaces became obsolete, and inside a 16-week period, a decision was taken to inculcate within it a basement car park. As I understand it, the lease arrangements are from the Belfast Harbour Commissioners for 250 years, with a further lease or buyout arrangement with the people who constructed it and the people who use it on a 25-year lease, and a 40-year lease below that to the underground car park. Could I ask, and it's a reasonable ask, if the title for the proposed surface car park and the proposed college were resident in the same place initially, and the lease that transferred included the original surface car park, as it could have since the title was resident in the same place, how that then became free of those incumbencies and would, in my estimation, have acquired considerable additional capital value as a development site for any other type of development in the light of the proposal which had received planning permission, which is the college itself, because it goes from being a flat piece of ground in a development area proposed as a car park that may or may not have had a legal impediment on it for educational use only, to a development site. And whether or not those who took all this into account should have, could have, or could have been expected to question the increase in the value of that piece of land. And I think the difficulties that could be hidden in there are that the public purse was viewed as open and available to suit the needs of private industry above and beyond the provision of the college, which is what it was doing.
Michael,
it's cynical, but forgive me.
Could it maybe stop you there, and hopefully somebody would pick up on some of the points that Michael has raised, and then Michael, you're welcome to come back again.
I appreciate that, Chair, and I know they are.
First of all, I need to make it clear, the only title that was transferring, the title comes from Harbour Commissioners through Titanic Quarter, and it came down then for the site that the college is built on, it came down to BMC. The additional surface car park, there was never any intention to transfer the title to that land to BMC.
So who would have owned the car park?
Titanic Quarter would have owned the car park.
Titanic Quarter and the immediate leaseors to the college, isn't that right?
Sorry?
The Titanic Quarter were one step above the college in terms, or two steps above the college in terms of title for that site.
But only BMC were only getting title to the site on which the college is built. The surface car park was never transferring to
BMC. I'm interested in is the one above them. It's the commonality of entitlement, the title between the car park and the site upon which the college is built.
Sorry, there's two sites, as I understand.
One parcel of land.
Okay, Michael, will we see that? Maybe Tom, just because I'm conscious Hansard is recording us, and let's break it up.
There is the 3-acre site on which the BMC campus is built. That came from Titanic Quarter, sorry, from the Harbour Commissioners through Titanic Quarter down to BMC. The proposal in relation to the additional bit of land that was to be the surface car park, the title on it was never transferring from anyone. It was going to remain with BHC and Titanic Quarter. And BMC students, staff, were to have the use of that for a 10-year period, at which stage it would have become unavailable to BMC and, as far as we understand, was going to remain in the ownership of Titanic Quarter and the Harbour Authority.
How could that have been viewed by the planners as the provision of on-site parking? Because it's not, it's on-site parking which is not on-site, which is adjacent to, but which is owned by somebody else. How could that have affected the planning application?
But maybe give Tom a
Well,
chance.
our understanding was that the planners would have been content to give planning permission to the BMC campus with those car parking arrangements attached. However, that was never tested with a planning application, so we don't really know, because what transferred in its place was the basement car park, wholly funded by Ivywood Colleges Limited.
Was there an amount of money set aside at the third bid time to provide the 250 surface car park?
There would have been in the financial model, in the bid that Ivywood Colleges made, and when they were taking that out of the bid, we sought a refund of money in relation to that part of the bid, given that that part of the bid was no longer being delivered.
What's on that site now, Tom? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I have no idea.
Okay.
No, Marie-Therese?
My understanding is it's the site literally at the back of the college. So at this minute, it's empty. You know, they have cleared it. They do use it occasionally for car parking at events, but other than that, it's at this minute cleared. Though my understanding is that Titanic Quarter, and they do have plans for its development.
Do you know the nature of those plans?
My last understanding was some form of commercial call and digital call centre. But that, you know, that's people have projects all the time.
No, but you would be a notifiable neighbour, I presume. In the
We
case
would, but we haven't been notified formally or in any way. This is just what you hear.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Michael. I think Adrian maybe wants to come in as a follow-up to this.
It's not a follow-up, it's just a different line altogether.
Okay, maybe that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We're going to park that one on Michael's in a minute.
Can I maybe just come back in on the bottom?
All right,
Back
Paul,
of that,
go
Chair.
ahead.
It's the additional cost. Michael alluded to it. Understand and I accept that the people who came back and said that they put the car park below the development, when they did that, there would have been additional costs because it would have taken, as Michael has alluded to, a lot more foundation work, everything else, the additional cost. Where they indicated in a clear and transparent manner to those who sat on the panel, made aware of the additional costs because of having to put an underground car park. Building the building is one point, but having to spend additional monies to deal with the underground aspect of it. Was
The addition of the car park costs no additional money to BMC or the public sector. The price that was bid in the tender for the provision of the building, the campus, BMC campus, remained unchanged, and any additional money that was required to deliver the basement car park was met by Ivywood Colleges from within their own resources, which obviously they hope to recoup over the 40 years of them using the car park as a facility for them to operate the car park. They're going to operate the car park for 40 years to hopefully get their money back, the money that they invested to build the basement car park.
Can I ask a wee question? Maybe I don't know whether it's actually going to clarify, or maybe it might create more of a difficulty. It's in relation to convoluted details, and you did mention about Ivywood Colleges, but we have a list of companies involved, and the names seem to be they seem to rotate quite a bit through this. There's commonality throughout the whole thing. With Harcourt Developments, Titanic Island Limited, Ivywood Properties Limited, Ivywood College Holdings Limited, Ivywood College Holdings College is limited, limited holdings, and then we have Ivywood Car Parks Limited, as well as Titanic Quarter Limited, and all of them have their fingers in this project. Every single one of these companies is involved in some way, shape or fashion, and within their returns would be receiving some form of payment, all of them, from the development of this site.
We have...
I think the question there, Tom, really is, I think where Paul's getting to is, in terms of all those companies, Tom, how much more difficult did it make in terms of negotiations for the college? Because, as Paul has read, there's a very long list of linked companies, linked directors. So, given you were on the project board, and given we're aware of all the difficulties you actually had with this contract, how much more difficult did that make it?
It made it significantly more difficult. And
did it concern you, all these linkages?
It did concern me.
What did you do about it?
Well, we acted at all times to protect the public.
Sorry, who's we?
The project board and BMC, the department as the approving authority.
What exactly did you do, Tom?
Well, we made sure that in negotiating the contract, our contract is with Ivywood Colleges Limited. We haven't actually contracted other than provided a lease. We provide a lease, BMC provide a lease to the car parking company. But the only company that we have contracted with is Ivywood Colleges Limited. That contract is actually a contract which is a set of obligations which, if they are delivered, on the other hand, merits the Ivywood Colleges a unitary charge. Conversely, if they don't, they don't get their unitary charge.
Before bringing Trevor or Michael back in again, at that stage, with Ivywood in all its forms, had you effectively lost control of the project?
I wouldn't think. I wouldn't say we've lost control of the project. We had to make sure that the relationships between all of the companies were correct and right, and that there was no risk or additional risk to the college. For example, the provision of the car park, in the report it says brought additional risks. Now, we didn't challenge that because it probably does bring additional risks, but it brings the additional risks to Ivywood Colleges, because Ivywood Colleges, again, I repeat, have a contract set of obligations, which if they deliver, they will get their unitary charge. If they don't deliver, for whatever reason, car park relationships between companies stepping up to hardcore, it's of no consequence to BMC. If they don't deliver the obligations in the contract, they don't get their unitary charge. And that is the safeguard that we have at all times to ensure that obligations contracted for are delivered.
Did you say, Tom, you had concerns with all the different companies?
Not concerns that we weren't able to overcome in the longer term, but yes, there were things that had to be...
who all did you alert to that, other than the project board? Who else?
We dealt with all of the things in the business case.
Sorry, who else did you raise that issue with the different companies? Your concerns?
The difficulties.
Well, it was raised within the college. It was raised within the college.
Who with?
With the governing body.
Who was? Who was?
In what sense? The governing body is the... I can't remember all of the names.
Well, given you were, obviously, it seems like you were the most senior person, and you're the person here today that was involved at that particular time. In particular, who did you raise concerns with?
Well, I would have brought all of the concerns back into the department through the finance director.
So who was who?
The finance director in Dale.
Well, the person that you've just said you raised it with.
Well, it would have been raised right up to the permanent secretary, the different permanent secretaries at all times.
And there's a good paper trail of that.
There would be a paper trail, yes.
Okay.
Can I just add? I mean, sorry, there's a lot of people who want to speak. Claire, over to you.
I'll try and control it the best I can, but at the same time I want it to be open and frank. And certainly before maybe yourself or Michael comes back in, there is a question here which I'd want to put to you for the record. Did your negotiating strategy include options for walking away from this deal? Sure. Under what circumstances would you have walked away?
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's really for Tom, but Derek.
Okay, I'm happy to. We went out to tender because we had a problem, College Square East and Brunswick Street. We got 2 tenders. We evaluated those 2 tenders. The most economically advantageous tender was the Titanic Quarter tender. There were times when we thought we might have to walk away. When, for example, Titanic Quarter were looking for a huge uplift in the value of the land.
Oh, can I just interrupt you there just a wee bit? You're saying that the Titanic Quarter was the most preferred advertising option on the table, but on the brief, you were actually looking for a town centre.
Sorry?
You were looking for a town centre space to build this college on to start off with. So how, when did the focus shift to Titanic?
Well, what we went out to tender with was seeking proposals to rebuild on Brunswick Street, or alternatively to come forward with another site which would be considered on its merits.
So you've described it as advantageous in terms of that site. Describe us why it was more advantageous than the city centre, given you were on the project board.
Yeah, well, the price was one of the issues.
Is it the starting price or the finishing price?
The finishing price. Obviously, the price we evaluated was the price we evaluated on the day, but that, however it shifted, continued to remain the most economically advantageous tender. You've asked, some of the things was the alternative bidder was proposing a 22-storey building on Brunswick Street. As you can imagine, the adjacencies and the functionality of a 22-storey building in relation to all of the different curriculum areas, etc., would be more convoluted in terms of quality than perhaps than was the 3-4-storey, more spacious 3-acre site at Titanic Quarter. So there was a quality, and there were
got an advantageous site in the Titanic Quarter, and part of that deal was in terms of you were doing a deal in terms of Brunswick Street, in terms of putting it into against the Titanic Quarter. Isn't that right?
That had been considered, yes.
No, I think that was the option at the start, was it not?
Yeah.
It was.
Well, yeah, it was,
yes,
but it was never.
So it was the option, and at some stage.
Sorry, it wasn't, and I have to be clear about it. It wasn't the definitive option in the ITN, in the documentation that went out. It was not a definitive that those sites would go into the project.
When did the Titanic Quarter become the most advantageous site? What year? When they were immediately after
they made their tender. Those tenders were evaluated in 2006, and they were designated as the preferred bidder on the basis that they were the most economically advantageous tender.
When was Brunswick Street removed from as an option?
Definitively, it was removed probably about 12 months later.
12 months. So why did it take 12 months to make a decision to remove it?
I think it was always our decision not to have it in the deal.
So why was it in
and
the
it
deal
was only
months?
definitively communicated.
Why was it in the deal, Tom?
The convention when we started out on this project was that in PPP projects, the surplus properties were disposed of in the deal.
Yeah. How much was it worth in 2006, Tom?
It was worse through those years. It was escalating up to 2007. It escalated with valuations, and I stress there were valuations up to 22 million.
Well, then, can I ask you, Tom, who decided to remove it from not to take it off the market, not to sell it?
Well, it was a project board decision in relation to the decision, but that would have had to be approved by governing bodies and by the department as well.
Who in the department then?
We're right up to accounting office.
So the permanent secretary then is who is responsible for that. And also then, these buildings now are worth what?
Much less, somewhere around about 4 or 5 million.
Yeah.
Well, there was an indication, and I don't know whether it was either a desktop operation done by LPS to give some value to these buildings back a few years ago, and I think it was 2010. They valued them at 4.6.
Yeah, there were various valuations.
4.6. Now, I appreciate that we're dealing with commercial issues associated with that site at the present moment in time, and my understanding is that you are currently in a position to deal or maybe close a deal in relation to those
We're currently in negotiations. You will have received, I presume, Mr. Chairman, you received the communication, and that was what was referred to. That's why in the meeting.
I don't wish to go into the commercial aspect of that.
Okay.
But Paul, I think we would better come back a stage.
Okay.
I'm still concerned why someone decided, and who, I think we need to tie down who made the decision to remove a building that was worth £20 million that particular time, given that would have offset the amount of the 2 buildings, sorry, that would have offset the amount of money in terms of what the public purse was spending here.
Yeah.
So who made that decision, Tom, to remove that?
Did they figure in the Belfast Master Plan?
Sorry, the inference in your question is that we could have got £20 million. That was never a realistic option. But
why?
In relation...
But did the department not put 20 million
the
in?
buildings were worth that in 2007.
Yeah, so who made the decision to remove them?
However, well, the project board, the governing body, and the
Someone has
department...
to have came with a proposal to remove them from the project. One person has to have been the driver. Who was the driver?
Well, I don't think it was one person.
Who was the 2 of the people then?
Well, it was the project board. It was the governing body endorsed it, and it was the department
What
endorsed
expertise
that.
was within the project board to make a decision like that?
Well, they did have property advisors on board. LPS were also there. LPS were the people who said that, in their opinion, the most transparent and best way of achieving open market value is to sell them on the open market when they are surplus. They weren't surplus in 2007.
People, the 3 different firms that estimate it and getting about £1.5 million in terms of cost, give advice not to sell a college that was worth, or 2 buildings that was worth approximately 20 million. That's what you're saying.
Sorry, can I just add a point?
Was that right or wrong, Derek?
The buildings could not have been sold then. The buildings can only be disposed of after the new premises are complete and the students leave the premises.
Was part of the deal in terms of the deal not done, Derek, in terms of whether it be Ivywood, Harcourt, or whoever it is, all these subsidiary companies, was it not part of the deal with the Titanic Quarter? So yes, it could have been.
It would only have been at the point of contract signing. At the point of contract signing.
When?
At the point of 2009, April 2009. That is when the contract was actually signed. And obviously, a point that Tom was going to make there, you're asking quite rightly, what would be the rationale for deciding not to incorporate these properties that would have become surplus at some stage in the future into the PFI deal? And, given what happened with the property crash, it's a very legitimate question, and it goes right to the heart of this thing. A couple of points there, if I might answer. The guidance or the advice which the department got from Land and Property Services is that we are charged, every public body is charged, to achieve full market value for a surplus asset. Now, what's the best way to do that? The advice from Land and Property Services is that the simplest way, the most transparent way, and the most accountable way of doing that is to sell it on the open market. And indeed, I think, this committee, a year later, and indeed the Audit Office, in their respective reports the very next year when they looked at the Pathfinder Education PFI projects, noted the fact that including the disposal of assets in a PFI deal can complicate matters. I think can unnecessarily complicate matters. I think that was a comment made by this committee.
That's fair enough, Derek, but then why was it allowed to be included at the start?
Because it was a concept at the start that this might be a good idea, but on reflection, On reflection, the decision was taken to remove them. One, because LPS guidance was as it was.
Was LPS on the project board then as part of that?
LPS was not on the project board.
They were just brought on.
But they were brought on, and the advice was sought from LPS and from, Central Procurement Directorate.
Okay, look, maybe to get this back
Sorry, can I add one point? The decision to include them or in the ITN predated the NIAO report and the PAC report of 2007.
I'm going to call Michael back in again, but Michael, if you agree with... Sorry, I want to put a formal question to him first. Again, staying with the issue. The department agreed to underwrite any shortfall should the sale of the properties not reach £20 million.
Yeah.
Was this potentially significant call on public funds made clear to both DFP, the Employment and Learning Committee, and this Assembly? And that requires...
You made that call as well. You made that call.
Right, well, that call was made ultimately by the Permanent Secretary in Dell, who is accountable for everything that goes on in Dell. It was made clear to DFP, because DFP approved all aspects of the project, including the business cases and the value for money assessment and so forth. I cannot answer your question whether it was made clear to the Dell Committee. I honestly don't know that, and I don't know whether that point was made clear to the Assembly. I will have to come back to you on that. I don't know the answer to those two questions.
Sorry, I think that's important because across the Assembly committees are complaining that sometimes they're not given all the information. So it would be helpful if we knew...
Was the Minister across this? Was ever discussed with the Minister?
Yes.
Or was that at the Permanent Secretary level and just the Minister forgot about it?
The Minister, the threshold, the size of this project was such that it exceeded the delegated limit for a Permanent Secretary to take a decision. So the route is the project board, then the department's approval would be sought, that is the accounting officer, then the Minister, then the Department of Finance and Personnel. So the Minister was involved in all of the approval of the business cases in this issue.
Chairman, we're actually getting into an interesting area here as well, and I think you're slightly touching on that, and following on from Adrian's point. Is it common practice then to exclude the relevant standing committees of the Assembly and the Assembly to make decisions like this? And are they always circumvented in such a way? Given that we've just formed in 2005, we're now talking in 2006 or 7, that we're making multi-million pound decisions. But are you telling us that this has been the norm, that the Assembly, or particularly the Standing Committee in relation to that, aren't aware?
My experience of engaging with Assembly committees, and particularly the Dell Committee, is that we make every effort to ensure the Dell Committee is aware of as much as possible of what is going on in the department on their regular submissions.
That's not really the question I'm asking.
I know.
I would rather you would answer the question I'm asking you. I know that you keep committees aware in terms of what you want to tell them. What I want to know is in terms of whether there's a multi-million pound project like this or anything else, is there occasions that you circumvent committees and circumvent the Assembly and make these decisions yourselves?
Are you talking about Dell specifically, or are you talking about all departments?
Well, given you're the acting Permanent Secretary of Dell, well, let's just talk about Dell, and then we can talk about your other ones later.
No, it is not the practice to circumvent the committee.
DHSS? BS?
Sorry?
Did it help? I think you were in...
Gosh, I was in health a long time ago.
Okay, this conversation wandering. Trevor,
I think that Sorry.
I'm going to have to park you for a moment.
Chairman, I think it's something we need to get to the bottom of this committee as well, because there is a Permanent Secretary here, and if we're learning today that this happens, we need to get to the bottom of this, because there's 108 members of this Assembly who are supposed to be accountable, and we are accountable, but the problem is civil servants have never been accountable. And they're making decisions, multi-million pound decisions, where the protocols would surely suggest, albeit a minister may have known, but there's another 107 people didn't know.
Well, I give you an opportunity to come back in again. And Michael, I'm sorry for...
No, that's...
Go ahead.
I'm infinitely patient. Getting back to the car parking trial, I'm going to ask you a straight question if I can. The cost of building a conventional building of that type on foundations is different to the cost of building building of that type on top of a car park, the stresses, the structures, the supporting mechanisms that actually keep it up. Are you 100% sure that the agreed cost at the time the contract was signed, no matter what the specification was, that the agreed cost did not include the cost of that the underground car park?
Yes,
100%.
100% sure.
What was the cost of the car park in percentage terms of the overall construction of the project?
We're told that the capital, we don't know the capital, we don't know exactly what the capital cost of the actual project at the campus might be, because we pay a unitary charge. We pay a unitary charge to Ivywood colleges. Ivywood colleges then disperse that money to the subcontractors. We don't have absolute visibility on what that would be. We understand that the capital value of the project, the capital value of the building is around about 44 million. We understand, but again, we don't have visibility on what Ivywood colleges borrowed off Ulster Bank to build the basement car park, but we're led to believe that it is about 5.3 million. So you're talking really, I suppose, about 1/8 of the total value, or 1/9 of the total value of the
cost of the car park itself,
1/5,
freestanding, could have implications for the cost of the construction of the building in the part you've already covered. Do you understand what I mean?
Of course it could.
And how is that? Look, it's all terribly complicated. We'll not get to the bottom of it until we see all.
Yeah, but the assurance I can give you is that Ivywood colleges bid us a sum of money to build a college without a car park. And that remained the sum of money
unless
that we paid them.
You used a word
when they
on
built the
planning,
when they built the
risk.
yes, sorry.
You used a term earlier on planning risk. I know development, and anything that begins with R in development is taken into account at the time. They must have known that there would be planning implications for that. And if I was them, I would have scaled the building, costed it to such a degree that it covered all the unforeseen consequences that might arise. You still got the building all be the same price, but they're away with maybe 4.5 to 5 million.
When did they bid you for the building?
Sorry?
When did they bid you the price of the building?
About June 2006,
right,
I think.
2006, they come up with the price. When was the car park included?
The car park was included months later.
So then why in August 2007 did there an additional go up from the cost of the site go from 3 million to 7.7?
The cost...
We're now at a situation where we've got the prices a year, 18 months before the price goes up.
The Ivywood colleges sought an increase in the price of the land and the price of the site.
2007?
Yes.
And when was it you made the decision not to sell or do the deal with the other colleges?
It was around about 2007 that there was notified.
Approximately?
I would have to check that, and I can check that for you.
I think, Mary-Therese, are you looking at there now for us?
I'm looking at it, according to the report, it was in December 06, so the very end of 06.
So in December 06, you made a decision not to sell buildings that was going to offset about £20 million. And then some months later, you have to actually add an additional £4.5 million.
Well, sorry, they sought an increase to 7.7.
How much did they get?
They got 2.
Right, so they got additional money.
They got additional money for the site, yes.
What was that used for?
The money for the site was divided equally between the holders of the lease, Belfast Harbour Commission and Titanic Quarter Limited. So the £5 million was divided between the Harbour Commissioners and Titanic Quarter.
Gentlemen, before I bring Paul back in again, it seems that there were, at this stage, at least 2 external bodies with their finger in the pie.
Yeah.
I put the question to you formally. At any stage was it considered that the department and the college consider one of the many options available to it? That is, opting out, going back to the reserve bidder, or going out to the market again? If not, why not?
It was considered on a number of occasions, but at all times, and particularly when the increase in the land value was being agreed, that we went back and re-evaluated the tenders to assure ourselves that Ivywood colleges still remained, even with the uplift in land values, still remained the economically most advantageous tender. We also knew that we had, at all times, that we had significant difficulties at College Square East and Brunswick Street. Those difficulties at all times remained to be resolved, and albeit though there were difficult decisions to be made, the view always was, right up until the contract was signed, that the best prospect and remained signing that contract to resolve those difficulties. There are tipping points that could have been reached that perhaps walking away would have been the answer, but although that remained an option, it was not considered that the tipping point had been reached.
By whom?
By the project board.
By the project board and the department. I mean, can I just add to what Thomas said, Chair? This was a difficult project. We ran into difficulties in the negotiations, and we've touched on some of those. There was the issue about the car park, there was the issue about the lease, there was the issue about the credit crunch and the bank losing its appetite. And we could have walked away at any of those points.
But each time there, you just come back to the department and got an order draw of money.
Well, and that's the point I'm coming to, and the point I made right at the outset, and the point that's actually acknowledged in the Audit Office report. At each decision point, we took steps to protect the public interest. And the way we protected the public interest was to assure ourselves that the bid that we were dealing with offered a positive value for money against the shadow bid model, which is the reference point and which is the way that you assess value for money. And that's what we did. And at each decision point, we took the opportunity to make sure that onerous conditions were not imposed upon us. I mean, and, you know, can I make a general point? This was a hugely important project. And, you know, given the times that are in it, it was very relevant to the department that in the middle of all these difficulties, it received actually from this committee a very, very critical report about the Springvale project, which failed. And you'll recall that, or some of you who were on the committee will recall that. And one of the criticisms, one of the central tenets of the criticisms directed to the department by this committee was that the department lost the will, that was the term that was used, to see through a difficult project and did not stretch itself to make sure it followed through and afforded a project. And all of that translated into a very pointed recommendation at this committee that if the department, that is Dell, encounters substantive operational problems with an important project, it should take all reasonable means to ensure that those problems are overcome and that the project objectives are achieved, and not addressing those problems in a meaningful way is not an option. That's what this committee said to the department. Now, that recommendation could have been written for... Sorry?
Why was it not carried out?
That recommendation, I would suggest, could have been written for this project. It was a major project. It was really difficult, and we had major problems with it, and we could have walked away. We didn't walk away. We stuck with it for the reasons that Thomas explained, because we saw a prize at the end to deliver the project objectives.
Was a prize at a price?
No, all the time. Yes, I agree. Yeah. At a price, and all the time within a positive affordability and value for money assessment. All the time.
How can you describe that come later, given the contract fixed alone, that you didn't look for other options, Derek?
Well, you know, that's a fair question.
I appreciate you saying it's a fair question based on your answer, because you said that it was always the best option. It's not the best option if we didn't explore other options. Given we were in a market, and I mean, as you've described, the banks were starting to get nervous because of the way properties were going, everybody was getting nervous because of the crash. There were still other options, but they weren't explored.
Well, other options were explored at bidding stage.
I'm talking about the latter stage, Derek. Whenever you've been at bidding stage and you have adjustments made, and those who you've actually entered this agreement coming back looking at additional millions of pounds, there was more than one, there was more than two opportunities for this project for you to back off, for the department to back off at that particular time. But in terms of options, you didn't look at other options. There's absolutely no evidence of other options we looked at here.
So how can
And
you
we-
say value for money?
At the final contract close stage, we did a value for money and affordability assessment, which looked not just at the shadow bid model, but at a public sector comparator, which was the ultimate other option. Let's call the whole thing off and back off. Now let's reflect where we were at that point, and consider what would have been a reasonable and rational and sensible decision to take. We had beaten our way.
We heard earlier on, sorry for interrupting you,
No,
but we
that's
heard
okay.
earlier on from Marie-Therese that this was the only show in town. So how do you square that
Yeah,
up
and,
with what you're
and
saying?
that's the point. I'm about to explain that. We had beaten our way through 30 months of really difficult negotiations, and it took too long. I accept that, and I have accepted that. We had dealt with huge problems, but at the end of that, we had reached the point where we had a contract, and bear in mind, this isn't a back of an envelope thing, this is 400 pages long, that worked both for the bidder and for the department. We had a proposal on the table which met the pressing business need, which was to replace 2 obsolete colleges. We had a proposal on the table which, by the assessment properly carried out, demonstrated affordability and positive value for money against the public sector comparator as well as the shadow bid model. So in the light of all those circumstances, what was the right decision? To say, you know what, we will walk away. What would have happened? Well, for a start, we would have been hauled through the courts for abortive costs, and indeed the final value for money assessment tried to put a figure on that. We wouldn't have had a project, we wouldn't have had a college, and we wouldn't have had a 30-month negotiation. We would have a 50-month negotiation.
But
So
was
I
the
actually
contract
think
not changed leading up to where you're at there?
Sorry?
Was the contract not changed leading up to where you are now? On behalf of the fair bidder?
No, there was only one contract that was signed, and that was April 2009. This was a negotiated process from preferred bidder right up to the contract sign. There were lots of changes going on.
Yes, but there was opportunities at that stage that wouldn't have got you to court to pull out.
Sorry?
You're trying to put in the right court today. There's no. You could have been in court by trying to come out of the contract. The opportunities for you.
No, actually,
the opportunity, Derek, was long before you signed the contract. That's when all the alarm bells were ringing. That I would have assumed, I would have hoped to have seen someone pulling out at that time, not after it was signed.
Okay.
The opportunities were long before that.
Well, I'm talking about before it was signed at financial close. However, even in advance of that, the reason, as Tom has explained, why we stuck with the contract was that the assessments we were doing showed that this was still the most advantageous bid, which carried the best opportunity of delivering the project objectives which were very, very important to us. But again, we built in the protection, the value for money assessment.
Right, can I stop you there? We only have a few minutes left because one member has to leave and then we lose quorum. So could I ask you, maybe in the interest of making the best use of our time
I have a couple of questions
sorry,
here too, Chairman.
this is the point I'm coming to. Can you direct everything through the chair so I can get everything?
Chair, I want to be quite pointed in one area. Within the development or the project board that we're sitting, and Tom, you alluded to it earlier on in relation to not knowing the exact cost of each part of the project. You got an overall figure of how much it was going to cost to deliver it, but the detail of that, what expertise did both the department put in as well as the Met in relation to having somebody independently to price what they were getting for their money?
We had previously done that in the shadow bid model. The inputs to which were constructed by the independent advisors that were appointed to the project, and which was signed off by the Central Procurement Directorate. So the bid that we got had a total MPV under the MPV in the shadow bid model. So given that overall it was given us value for money, we would not have been that concerned by the individual constituent parts, as long as we were getting an overall deal that offered value for money.
That brings me right back to the very first question I asked in relation to the square metre cost by comparison to others, which was extremely high. And I'm just wondering where this was. The strategic board Investment Board involved in any of that proceeding?
The Strategic Investment Board supported the project to act.
Okay, they supported the project. Would they have had the expertise within them to actually, yes, they could support it in financial terms, but would they have had the expertise from a building and QS point of view to have actually given you whether you were getting value for money? Because I know how developers work, having worked with them and working with them still. You give them a figure, they'll say, I'll deliver that for that price. If you give them half that price, they might still be able to deliver exactly the same thing, and that's how some of them work. So I'm wondering just how...
But our figure would have been garnered from market intelligence that existed at the time.
Well, I used a date. I used a date where 2 colleges were delivered by another board. I think it was the Southern Board were delivering 2 colleges, 2 further education colleges, and the price was around 40% cheaper per square metre delivery than what we have. And that's why I went back to the very start, to the specification and finish, and who set the specification and finish. And I'm saying, were we dragged by the nose to actually deliver a Rolls Royce, all singing, all dancing, or were we not? That's the point. Who
Well,
said that?
all of those shadow bid costs would have been constructed long before any developer came on the horizon. So we would not, in setting those...
I'm happy to hear that. I'm happy to hear that, because I always am fearful that somebody else is dragging the horse, as opposed to somebody actually riding the horse. Somebody's dragging.
But there was no bidder on the scene when the shadow bid model.
Yeah,
was
if I can
first
add one
developed.
other thing.
Is there any commonality between consultants and who we ended up with as a preferred bidder?
No.
No.
Okay, Paul. Adrian, and then I'll call Michael.
No, I'm finished.
Go ahead.
Right. Just following on from Paul's question before I go into a wee bit further, the expertise you got at that stage, of the shadow bids, where did it come from? Was that the consultants? Was it
The consultants would have garnered that
Where did
from...
it come from?
The consultants would have garnered that from the contemporary market intelligence that existed at the time.
And was there any relationship between the consultants and they end up the preferred bidder?
No.
None whatsoever. Just worried about that there. Right, we'd established then earlier who made the decision not to sell Burnswood Street and College Square East, but we didn't establish why that was made.
Well, can you just clarify? We couldn't sell Brunswick Street.
No, in 07 I'm talking about here, sorry.
Sorry, in 2007. You
2007,
mean
there
not
was
to include it in the
yes.
PFI?
Yes.
Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Why?
yeah.
Well, I think I had started to explain that.
Yeah.
I mentioned the fact that the property services had advised us that the best way to get full market value was through an open market process.
Yes.
In other words, sell it on the open market. And you
Which
can
didn't happen.
Pardon?
It didn't happen.
But it will happen.
But it didn't happen.
But it couldn't have happened then. It couldn't have happened then. We had several thousand students in the buildings.
After the students moved out.
Yeah, and yes, and we put it on the market, and because of the state of the market out there, nobody was bidding, and banks aren't lending to developers to buy such properties. That's just the state of the market, and we didn't predict the property crash. I'll hold my hands up to that. But then I suppose neither did half the Western governments in the world and the central banks and everybody else.
We'll not hold you responsible for not predicting that. That's one thing we'll not hold you responsible.
Thank you for that.
Right. Sorry, before Michael goes, I need the agreement of the committee to write to the department with any outstanding issues.
Yeah.
Chairman Allen,
I think it needs to come back.
I think we
Could we reserve the right to call future witnesses?
Sorry?
Yeah, because we reserve the right to call future witnesses.
Absolutely.
I think we'll have to do that.
There were a number of options we considered in private session, and one of them was to call for additional witnesses. And I think, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Chair, I am sorry. I'm cutting across you. I am quite happy to come back to this committee. You've run out of time, but I'm at your disposal.
Good.
Yes. Well,
So may you free to come back?
thank you.
I'm not sure I like the answer to that question. But yes, I will come back.
Thank you very much for that offer, and I'm very conscious, Elaine, we didn't hear from you at all. And no doubt you put a lot of preparation into this. And you weren't asked a single question.
I'm perfectly happy.
Chair, I think that might come into maybe when we're looking at changes that have been made.
Yes.
Now, I'm conscious
I'm
in
very,
saying
very
that I've
happy. I'm very
stitched up
happy to
these
talk
two
to you all
individuals.
afterwards about the changes that have been made. So
Excellent, I know that.
I agree with Derek. We have no difficulty answering the questions that any
All
further
right.
ones the committee has put to.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Formalities for I go.
Yeah, just a bit of discussion anyway. So.
Now officially adjourn the public hearing. If you can press the red button.
Okay.
And obviously informally we can reflect on